And there are a lot of Americans that are going to be tuning in to you this morning, and they want to know who is to blame for this. There are a ton of people arguing over this right now that's saying it's Mitch McConnell's fault. No, it's Donald Trump's fault for picking candidates like Dr. Oz, and then it's not even his fault, it's his wife's fault. And everybody's trying to figure out, how do you put this in a box? And I think it's so important to get your take on this. What happened? How did this happen? And who's to blame for it?
Well, Ben, let me start out by saying I am so pissed off I cannot even see straight. We had an extraordinary opportunity. We had a generational opportunity. This should have been a fundamental landslide election. We should have won the House and the Senate. We should have a 30, 40, 50 vote majority in the House. We should have 53, 54, 55 Republicans in the Senate. And instead, holy crap, the Democrats keep the Senate. Worse than that, the Democrats potentially grow their majority in the Senate. Worse than that, yes, we take the House, but at best we're going to take the House with a couple of seats. Maybe. There is an outside chance we lose the House. I don't think we will. I think the numbers are enough that we will hold on to the House, but it's going to be a majority of 219, 220, 221, 222. 218 is a majority. So we're going to be looking at a 2-3-4 vote majority at best. The rage Americans are feeling across this country, the rage that I'm feeling, there are almost not words to describe it. Because this opportunity was screwed up. It was screwed up badly, and the people are going to pay the price are the American people. The country is screwed for the next 4 years because of this. We're going to see horrible left-wing judges confirmed for the next 2 years because of this. We're going to see judges taking away our free speech rights, our religious liberty rights, our Second Amendment rights. It is an enormous missed opportunity, and I got to say it is hard to describe my feelings as anything other than rage right now.
Sure, sex is nice, but have you ever heard Ted Cruz absolutely lose his mind over his party's midterm losses? Here's Ted Cruz on his podcast having an absolute meltdown over the Republicans' poor performance in midterms, not only failing to get the red wave that they'd convinced themselves was coming, but actually ending up with fewer seats in the Senate than before. He says this opportunity was screwed up, it was screwed up badly. But here's the thing. Ted is making this argument as if he's some outside observer. He's not. He was on the campaign trail with Republicans. He was crafting that party's campaign pitch to the voters. This guy isn't some neutral arbiter. He made himself one of the faces of the campaign. If anyone deserves credit or blame, it's this guy. Also, it's so funny watching Ted Cruz coming in now and bemoaning the Republicans' election results like a Monday morning quarterback, as if that's in any way difficult to do, as if he'd been calling it this way all along. In case you think that this guy is some authority here, just remember, this was Ted Cruz just before the election.
Listen, I am very, very optimistic. I think on election day, we're not just going to see a red wave, we're going to see a red tsunami. I believe Republicans are going to retake both the House and Senate. I think in the House, we're going to see big majorities, 30, 40, 50 seats. I think the order of magnitude of 2010. In the Senate, I think we're likely to end up at 53 or 54 Republicans. I think the most likely pickup in the country is Adam Laxalt in Nevada. I think he's going to make a terrific new senator. I think Herschel Walker is going to win in Georgia. I'm in the middle right now of a nationwide 17-state month-long bus tour. So I've been campaigning with these guys all over the country. I was with Herschel in Georgia last week. I was with Adam a couple of weeks before that. I was with J.D. Vance last week. I think J.D.'s going to win. I think Dr. Oz is going to win in Pennsylvania. I think we're going to have some big victories. And I also think Arizona, Blake Masters, and New Hampshire, General Bolduc, both have a real shot at winning those races. And I think we have a puncher's chance in Colorado and in Washington State as well. So, I think this is going to be a big historic election.
In other words, if Ted is upset about how everyone miscalculated this election, he should probably start with himself. The guy was out there spiking the football just as much as everyone else. He is just as delusional as everyone else here. And by the way, if Ted thought that Republicans screwed up their campaigns, this might be a good time for some introspection, considering Ted Cruz himself spent weeks on a tour bus campaigning for 8 candidates, and guess what? all 8 of those candidates lost in midterms. So I get that he wants to showcase himself now as the guy with all the answers, but if you're looking for what failed on the campaign trail for Republicans, it was quite literally Ted Cruz. But as much as I'd like to focus on Ted Cruz's incompetence, let's focus for a second on why Republicans lost. It's because while people like Ted spend every day wailing about inflation and gas prices and convincing themselves that those were the only issues people could comprehend thanks to the Fox News feedback loop that they themselves created, the rest of the country was actually worried about the fact that Republicans ran on the biggest rollback of rights in this country's history. They ran on the destruction of democracy. They ran on election denialism. They ran on the elimination of reproductive rights and Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. So I get that Republicans did the whole Fox News thing where they told you that all the issues that matter were crime, 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 and crime, but the rest of us have eyes and a brain and could recognize that them trying to will their hopes into existence doesn't actually make that a reality. So I would offer, if Ted Cruz was truly trying to get to the bottom of why his party suffered such a repudiation of the ballot box, that it's because Americans aren't dumb, and no matter how many times you try to tell them what they care about, we can make up our own minds about what's important. Like, for example, having a functioning democracy and not empowering people to federal office whose only platform is that elections are only valid when Republicans win. Just, for starters. I'd venture to guess, too, that when you have one party whose sole priority is to make sure that government fails, and another party that spent the last 2 years showing all of the ways that government can actually work for people, the choice becomes pretty clear for Americans. And that's the irony in all of this, that this isn't even one of those situations where you just have to hold your nose and vote for the lesser of two evils, because Democrats have spent the last 2 years with the thinnest of majorities showing what happens when government does work. Democrats made sure all COVID tests and vaccines were completely free. They passed funding for the first ever upgrade of our infrastructure in our lifetimes. They began the process of EV charging stations across the United States. They passed the biggest climate investment in the history of this country and passed the CHIPS Act, both of which together resulted in an avalanche of companies announcing investments in the United States, including Toyota, First Solar, Sparks, Corning, LG, Honda, Micron, Qualcomm, and Intel, just to name a few. That means fewer supply chain disruptions, lower supply costs, lower product prices, and more jobs for Americans. Democrats got the government to negotiate lower drug prices. They capped out-of-pocket costs for seniors at $2,000 a year and insulin costs for Medicare recipients at $35 a month. Democrats forgave student loan debt for 43 million Americans. Democrats got the first gun safety bill passed in 3 decades that'll keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, fund red flag laws in the states, and expand background checks for those between 18 and 20 years old. Democrats pardoned federal marijuana convictions and started the process of removing cannabis as a Schedule I drug alongside heroin. Those are all tangible benefits for Americans. All of those things help us. They are all popular. Those were what Democrats ran on, and without a single vote to spare, they got that done. That's why people voted for Democrats, because those elected officials actually showed that keeping them in power was worth it. The simple fact is that Republicans have spent their time over the last 2 years broadcasting that they don't actually stand for anything. They claim to be the party of family values, and then they lined up behind Donald Trump, a guy who's paid God knows how much money for hush money payouts for affairs. They claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility, and yet the last time Republicans had full control of government under Donald Trump, they added $7.8 trillion to the debt and passed a tax cut that dried up all federal revenues when we needed them most during the pandemic. They claim to be pro-military and yet refused to vote for the PACT Act, which gave health care to sick veterans, because they were salty that Joe Manchin allowed the Democrats to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. They claimed to be pro-police and yet did nothing as the Capitol Police were being assaulted while the mob was trashing the Capitol on January 6th. They claimed to be pro-states' rights, and yet they all signed on to the Texas lawsuit seeking to overturn the election results in 4 other states because they weren't happy with the outcome. So if Ted Cruz is wondering why the voters don't think Republicans stand for anything, it's probably because the Republican Party doesn't stand for anything. Of course, the irony here is that Ted Cruz is among the biggest offenders in all of this. He helped validate the events of January 6th by objecting to the election results, even though he knew they were perfectly fair. He voted for the $1.9 trillion tax cut that dried up those federal revenues. He traffics in fear porn on a nightly basis on Fox just to whip up the base. So let's be perfectly honest here. If Ted Cruz is looking for the culprit as far as the total lack of any steadfast principles is concerned on the right, he doesn't have to look too far. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts.